Hi, this is Ralph for the Prineville Chess Club. In this video, I'm going to play another bot opponent, and I think I will end up playing Oliver, who's 550 rated. Now, I'm going to play as black in this game, and I want to focus on piece movement and central control. I also want to add a little bit of artificial time pressure, because obviously in the real games that you play, there's going to be a clock. And I have a little productivity timer right here, and I'm going to set this for 25 minutes. Now, when you're playing a bot, there's no clock associated with it. The bot will move instantly. But it's perfectly reasonable that a 10-minute game with an increment or a 15-minute game can last a total of 25 minutes. So obviously, you can start to reduce the amount of time that you have on your clock timer or your kitchen timer in order to start to build up that faster thinking and thought process during a real-timed game. Okay, so I'm going to play Oliver. I'm going to choose black. Let's go ahead and start it up. Excellent. Oliver starts off with e3. Okay, I want to take control of the center as much as possible. I'm going to start with d5, grabbing some center space. Oh, okay. Now, it's kind of an interesting approach here. Oliver is challenging my center space with a pawn off to the side. Now, if I were to grab this pawn, I would be losing one of my center pawns, and Oliver would still have both of their center pawns. So I'm not necessarily interested in taking this pawn. I don't think I want to do that. What I will do is support my d pawn with my c pawn. So if Oliver takes, I can take back, and I'll still have two central pawns. Now Oliver is pushing g3. This indicates that they want to bring their bishop to g2. This is called a fianchettoed bishop. Pretty common technique. Basically, you move the pawn in front of your knight, and you tuck your bishop right in there. I could do the same thing on my side. Probably not appropriate for me to do that for my queen bishop, but my king bishop could potentially be fianchettoed. It's a great spot for this bishop. It kind of develops it, and it gives it some scope and some range. If Oliver puts their bishop right there on g2, it's also going to add more target, more attack to this, what's turning out to be a sensitive d5 pawn. So we kind of have an idea of what our opponent is thinking, but we also still want to continue with good principles, and that is develop our pieces, take control of the center. Now, right now, my d5 pawn does have two supporters. It's got my c pawn and my queen pawn. So my d5 pawn is decently protected at the moment. So I'm going to continue to develop. I'll bring out e5. Okay, so they're increasing the pressure on that d5 pawn. It's tempting to take towards the center, but I don't know if I really want to. I think I'm going to wait a little bit, and I'm going to develop my king knight. Okay, perfect. Opponent starts to take. There are a lot of situations where you want your opponent to take first, and then you can respond, and you'll take on your terms. So I think this is going to be okay for me. I'll take back with my c pawn, and if they take back here, now I have a choice. I can take back with my queen, or I can take back with my knight. A nice thing about taking back with the queen is I'm looking directly at this rook, which is undefended, and I'm preventing this bishop from fianchettoing into its ideal space. Now, of course, white can easily respond by developing a knight, which is protected by their queen. So it has a little bit more targeting potential. If I take with my knight, it's not too bad. You know, if I take with my knight, that does get the knight in a pretty good location. Oh, another drawback, if I were to take with my queen, they could develop their knight with tempo, developing while they're attacking, and I'd be forced to move my queen away. You know what? I'm going to take with my knight. Okay, they develop a knight. Attacking my e5 pawn, I'm going to develop a knight and add protection for that pawn. Now, they've just moved their knight two times consecutively. That's something you generally want to avoid, especially early in the game. Moving the same piece twice is not a good thing. They've also blundered it. They've moved their knight in an exact spot where I can take it with a pawn, or I can take it with the knight that I recently moved out. So you'll see this happen, of course, definitely when you're playing the beginner and intermediate level bots. They will just make some bad blunders, but let's not focus on it too long. I'm going to preserve my e-pawn in its location, and I'll take back with my knight. Now I'm getting a check with the bishop development, but the bishop is checking and developing in a place where I can easily grab it with my knight. This is a pretty common beginner mistake too. When you see a checking opportunity, it's tempting just to go for that check. But you always need to be aware of how can your opponent respond. Checking where you lose your piece is definitely not a good thing to do, but checking where the opponent can easily defend or avoid it, or especially defend with development, yeah, it may not be worth that check. I will just go ahead and grab this bishop with my knight. Okay, their queen is making a move. Now they're developing their queen. Sometimes developing the queen before you get all your other pieces developed is frowned upon. It's nice to develop your regular pieces, your bishops, your knights first, get your king castled, and then bring the queen out for an attack. But they do have an agenda. They want to go for this undefended e-pawn here. Let's see. I think I will develop and defend at the same time. I'm going to develop my bishop and defend that pawn. Okay, so they have developed their knight to a3. I'm going to take this knight. By the way, this knight is on the edge of the board, which is not necessarily a good thing. A knight on the rim is dim. I am up material. I'm up 6 points of material. So I'm feeling very confident about my position. I am going to take this knight for the sole purpose of messing up their pawn structure. So white now has double pawns along the edge of the board. That's generally pretty bad. They also have 3 distinct pawn islands. There's a group of 3 pawns. There's an isolated pawn in the middle. And then they have double pawns or double isolated pawns off to the side. The pawns are isolated because there's no other pawns to their flanks that could support them. So they're called isolated pawns. Having multiple pawn islands is best avoided. It's better if you can minimize the number of pawn islands. So white has 3 pawn islands, whereas black has 2 pawn islands. So I've got this group of 4 and I've got this group of 2. Great. So now I will castle because I can. And I'm going to try to set up a little tactical trap. Can I do this? I think I might be able to. What I want to have happen is I want the white queen to end up taking here and putting themselves in front of their own king. And then I'm going to bring my rook out, skewering their queen. They will, and actually technically I'll be the queen will be pinned. So skewers are a little bit different than pins. This would technically be a pin. But then I'll be able to win the queen. So I am not going to be quick to take this pawn. And in fact, I may end up sacrificing my bishop very soon. So I'm just going to make another kind of quiet move off to the side. I'm going to bring this b pawn out and see if they take. Oh, they don't take, and they actually move their king to a safer square. Probably better if they castled, though, because they could have castled. All right, time to move on. And it looks like I do have a checking opportunity. So I'm keeping an eye out for checks, captures, and threats. And my knight moving here could check, but does it lead to anything? I'm not sure that it does. What other potentials do we have? Well, the white queen and the white king are on the same diagonal. They're on a light squared diagonal, and I happen to have a light squared bishop available to me. If I could get my bishop here, that would be a bishop fork between the king and the queen, and I could win the queen. Now, I can't do it now because the white queen would just take my bishop. So, and I don't see an easy way I could necessarily support that. So instead of checking, I am going to move my knight, attacking their queen, and see if their queen stays on this light squared diagonal. It doesn't. It moves away. I'm going to develop my bishop with a check, make them move their king. I'm going to take this free pawn because it's undefended and it doesn't look like white can respond in any way. Now, by the way, I've created for myself 3 pawn islands, but I'm up pretty good in material and white has just blundered their queen. I'm going to go ahead and grab that queen. Looks like all of my pieces have been developed. I've castled. My rooks are connected. When you hear rooks are connected, that means they are the king is not between them. They are able to move freely across the rank, and they can start to be moved over to an open file. Well, I'm ready to start looking for checkmates. Let's see if I could get my queen here on e2 with my bishop supporting it. That might be pretty nice. So I'm going to go ahead and move my queen to f3. That blocks white from pushing their pawn and allows me to create a battery. Now, if I move my queen here, where is white going to move? They can't move to any of these squares. They can't move to c2. They'll only be able to go. Nope, they can't go there. So this is a forcing move. If I check the king, they can only go to c1. Will I have a move after that? I might, because I've got this rook down here, and that can start doing some checking. Then the king, after moving to c1, very likely will have to move over to b1, which is a light square. And I might be able to bring my bishop down and target that king there. And that could be a checkmate. I'm going to give it a try. Queen up, check, king over, rook check, a block, fair enough. I'll take the bishop with check. They move to that light square as expected. Checkmate with the bishop. Okay. Now that game went pretty well. My timer is still clicking away. I've got a little over 11 minutes left. So I feel pretty good about the time usage on that one. I'm going to click on game review. Okay, so 88%, not bad. That's a B+. And hey, we got a great move on this one. That's pretty cool. So no blunders, no misses, no mistakes. Handful of best moves and a great move. That's pretty cool. By the way, you can't see this, but a little bit below, chess.com does give you, an estimated rating. You played like this or you played like that. And those are kind of nice sometimes, but don't put a lot of stock in those. From what I've learned, they're not very accurate, but I guess it is kind of nice to see sometimes. Something they do show down there that you can't see on my recorder is they'll let you know how you did in the opening, the middle game, or the end game. All right, so this is pretty good. Now I'm going to do a little bit of analysis. I'm looking over at this chart. Now they do have a button down here that's off screen for starting a review. I'm not going to use that start review option. Instead, I'm going to click this little magnifying glass, which is going to go into analysis mode. And I find this to be a better way to study your games afterward. Now, when I'm looking at a game like this, I do see these engine lines up here, but I am going to avoid looking at those, at least right away before I think about a particular move and stuff like that. I typically play chess on my iPad, on my tablet, and it's easy for me when I'm doing the analysis phase just to kind of keep my hand or block those engine lines so my eyes don't notice them so much, because it's helpful to go through your game and find these critical moments or mistakes that you made and think for yourself on what you could have or might have done better or taken advantage of. So I can move through this game. I'm just going to kind of tell myself not to look over at those engine lines. I can move through this game using the arrows on my keyboard, or I can click the little arrows down here, but I'm just going to use the arrows on my keyboard. And I'm looking for the symbols that chess.com puts on here. You can turn those little symbols off and on. By the way, that's the symbol for a book move. So generally, often the first few moves you might make in a chess game are going to be book moves. And if they're not, you might want to study that opening a little more to see if they are a book line. Basically, they're documented openings. Well, let me turn off my timer. So that's a book move. Now, the other thing I'm doing as I move through this, I'm keeping an eye on this evaluation bar on the left. Right now, white has a slight advantage. And you can kind of remember the midline of the chessboard is even. And if the white bar moves down, that means white has the advantage. If the black bar moves up, then black has the advantage. As it should be at the very beginning of the game, it's pretty even. White will always have the slightest of advantages in the first move or two of the game, just because white goes first. So I'm going to press my down button on my arrow. Oh, and I must have somehow... Oh, you know what? I was supposed to press the right arrow, so let me just click back over to that first move. I hit the down arrow and that jumped to the end of the game. So let me press my right arrow. Okay, and then I'm opened with d5, a book move. That was a good move. It's got the little thumb mark, so maybe not the best move, but it is a good move. I defended. Check mark is a good move, okay move. Okay, my opponent makes an inaccuracy, so this little question mark, exclamation mark is an inaccuracy. It may not be bad, it may not be good, but it's not one of the few best moves that they could have made. So instead of fianchettoing, they probably should have ended up taking. Now, when you're in an analysis, I can back up. So, well, what should white have done instead? Well, white had the opportunity to take, and then that would have forced me to take back, and they would still have their central pawns. So that could be kind of interesting there. I'm going to back up a couple. So instead of fianchettoing the white, that white G pawn, what should they have done? Well, I'm going to back up just before that, and this time I am going to look over at the engine, and I can see that, oh, okay, knight f3 would have been a good move for white, or d4, or knight c3 would have been a good move for white. So knight f3, d4, or knight c3. Excellent. Now, why are those the best engine moves for white? Because they are all controlling the center. They are all getting pieces developed. So controlling the center is always a good thing. That's why those pawn pushes are very often the first couple, 3 moves of the game. And of course, getting these knights out first. Often you'll hear knights before bishops in developing, so get those knights developed first. The pawn move maybe not so bad in inaccuracy, but it requires the pawn move, and later the bishop is moving, but the knights are still in their home positions. White has still not established control of the center. They're allowing black to control the center. So now we can kind of make sense of, oh, I see why these engine moves are considered the top 3 moves. Okay, if you get a little star, that's the best move. So in the three or four moves that the engine might suggest, that would be one of the best ones. Okay, there we get a blunder. So double question marks is a blunder. It's a mistake. A blunder doesn't always have to be a big piece like a queen or a rook. It can be with a pawn. Now let's see if I responded the proper way when my opponent blundered. I'll hit my right arrow, and I didn't. I have an inaccuracy, so I did not respond in the best way. And you can see after the blunder, the black bar is up pretty high, and I have like a 2.5 advantage, minus 2.5. They give the black side a minus sign. But when I do my inaccurate knight move, my developing move, the black bar is still higher. I still have an advantage, but not as much of an advantage as I had before. So this would be a good moment for me to think about, what should I have done better? Okay, so instead of bringing out my knight, and I'm not looking over at those engine lines, I want to see if I can come up with 1 or 2 candidate moves that I think would have been better than that knight move. Let's see, I'm considering a few things. Well, since we have this piece here, I could have taken that, I should say pawn, not piece. I could have taken this pawn quite easily because it's undefended. So that would have been a free pawn. Now, if I took to the right, I don't know if I like that one so much, because white would be able to take back with their bishop, and that would develop their bishop. I'd be helping them develop. So I do not like that move. I'm really thinking that taking d takes e4 probably would have been my best response. I didn't consider my checks, captures, and threats on this particular move. Now, do I have any other good moves? Well, of course, I've got multiple developing moves. We know the knight move is inaccurate. I don't like the idea of bringing my b knight out because that would block in my bishop. Could have considered developing my bishop, but to where? I can't go there. I can't go there. I can't go there. I'd have to develop it into there. That doesn't seem so good. So I'm thinking d takes e4 would have been my better move. Now I am going to look over at the engine lines, and sure enough, d takes e4 was the best move. That would have maintained that minus 2.5 advantage for black, and that would have been a good one. Now, the move I did, knight f6, is actually second on the engine moves list, even though it was recorded as an inaccuracy. So in a real game, if you make an inaccurate move that is still really doing well at keeping you with an advantage in the game, and it was one of the engine moves, I wouldn't feel too bad about that kind of thing. However, this does point out a weakness, a mistake that I truly made. I moved without considering other candidate moves. I didn't look at all of my opportunities to take a pawn and be up a pawn without any risk. Okay, I think that was a pretty good session there. When you analyze a game, do not feel like you have to analyze the whole thing. Sometimes just landing on 1 or 2 critical moves and mistakes is enough just to kind of get you thinking about what you could have done better and what you can do better in your next games. So the critical moment for me was not evaluating my opponent's pieces and seeing if there was something that I could take for free. So I missed an opportunity. And let's just kind of fly through. That was my great move. Don't get too high and mighty on yourself here. If chess.com says a move was great and you realize, well, that's a pretty logical developing move, I'm not really ready to collect my trophy for that knight move to c6. Okay, but it's nice to know, but I probably would have made that move anyway. And of course, opponent blunders, we take, blunders, we take. develop, we take. Yeah, these are all good moves. Develop, attack, check, take. Decent move, little check mark. Blunders the queen, take, best move. Okay, we set up our attack. Bishop comes out, which is their best move, by the way. We check, force the king away. So the little symbol here with the arrow pointing to the right, that just means it's a forced move. The king only had one square, or the piece only had one square that they could move to, so there was no decision to make. It was a forced move. It's just a coincidence that the little arrow icon is pointing to the right and the king moved to the right. This symbol always has an arrow pointing to the right. Check with a rook. It's an okay move, not necessarily the best. It says d3 was best. Oh, I could have moved d3 up. Okay, let's look at that real quick. So had I moved d3 up, I would have been threatening checkmate right here with my queen and maybe checkmate slightly faster. And there's really no way that white can stop that checkmate. So I didn't catch that particular checkmate, but did see the one with the rook. The king again is four. Oh, that's true. They were able to block temporarily. King is forced to move, again, forced move. And then we deliver checkmate with the bishop. Okay, that was a pretty good game. Opponent getting a little bit more challenging with the bot, so I will very likely do another game focusing more on central control. And I also want to pay better attention to checks, captures, and threats. Take care.